Welcome to another adventure with the Biolocation team. This time, instead of looking at moons and planets, we're going to be looking at archaeology. In other words, what is under the ground. Now, archaeologists are pretty good when it comes to the modern era of humanity. In other words, when they're dealing with the 10,000 years that modern people have been around, then they're okay, because there are masses of broken pots around, and there's nothing an archaeologist likes better than a bit of broken pot, apart from doing a bit of digging. Now, what we don't hear so much about is what came before that 10,000 year period. And we know that there's an enormous expanse of time during which humans were on the planet, and their cousins, the Neanderthals, who had a bigger brain and could have been brighter than humans. So I'm just going to take you through the timeline so that we can see the vast expanse of archaeological time that we've got to play with. So putting it back to when the Ice Age, the ice started retreating about here. So from this period here, more and more ground is becoming available as the ice goes north, and humans can move up from the south and occupy the land vacated by the ice. But during the retreat of the Ice Age, in fact from about 40,000 years ago onwards, there's a great deal of environmental or climatic instability. In other words, there'd be warm periods, cold periods, warm periods and cold periods. So it's quite possible that for a few thousand years the environment was nice and warm up here, and people developed a civilization, and all sorts of things could have happened during those warm periods. Anyhow, if we go back a bit further, this time to say 27,000 years ago, we're told by the anthropologists, the archaeologists, that the Neanderthals became extinct. Now, we have to be a wee bit careful here because of their use of words. You can't say that they became extinct. All you can say is that from 27,000 years onwards up to the present, they haven't been able to find any traces of them. So they're drawing the conclusion that they weren't around. But it's quite possible, of course, that round about 27,000 years ago, they changed the methods by which they dealt with the dead, so that no traces have been left. We also know that they were pretty bright, and from the work that we've been doing on the archaeology of the Neanderthals, we know that they're running villages, they had a religion, and they're making their clothing, they had domesticated animals and so on. So they were very much like the early humans in terms of the development of their culture and what they were doing. They used dogs and so on. So let's just bear in mind that this may not be the period of extinction of the Neanderthals, but in point of fact that they were around for quite a bit longer. Anyhow, because of the lack of information in this period, and we're dealing with a big period now which we have called the silent time, because of the lack of information available there. And we're going back to about 70,000 years ago, when humans appear to have moved into Europe and be available for study in Europe. So we're pretty certain, or the archaeologists are pretty certain, that humans were moving in round about this period. And then before that, we know from work outside of Northern Europe, of course, that humans and Neanderthals were available, roaming the planet up to 300 10,000 years ago. And on this sort of time scale, that takes you back over to where that white plaque is. So there's an enormous amount of time. And the question is, what were humans and Neanderthals doing during that time? They couldn't have just been sitting there doing nothing, because then we've got the problem of explaining why 10,000 years ago humans decided not to sit around doing nothing and started developing cultures and eventually walking on the moon. So let's think of the question sort of backwards. Let's assume that they were doing something, that they had in fact developed advanced cultures and technologies. So we don't go around looking for shards of pottery. What we do is we look for the products of advanced civilizations. We look for the materials, the aluminium, the titanium, the chemicals. We look for the sorts of equipment that they would have used and developed. And if we can find them, then we've got a pretty good idea that this silent time was in fact a very active time, with advanced civilizations developing during that period and then waning and disappearing, leaving what appears to be no evidence. But the evidence, you have to know what you're looking for, and you have to recognize it when you see it. And what we're going to do now, the biolocation team is going to show you how we look for the evidence of advanced civilizations during the silent time. And we're now going to move over to a piece of equipment which you're going to find rather surprising. So if you can just follow me. This is archaeological equipment. It's down in the ground, or the traces of it are down in the ground. You can't dig down and actually find it unless you're looking for the chemicals and the magnetic signatures of those chemicals. So this is what we've done. We've actually found a site not so far from here, and we've taken the magnetic image of that site and we've brought it over here onto the garden, where we can actually look at it in some detail. And it's an underground site, and the reason for it being underground we'll see in a minute. And it contains, if you like, all the paraphernalia that a shift system might require if it's going to look after a rather important piece of equipment. And right down to the beds. So you can see on the far side there, the actual beds are marked out by canes. And in the space here, you've got areas for eating and drinking. So this particular area here is for drinking. And they also have sort of cooking facilities as well. We've identified where their oven or stove is for doing a bit of cooking. Now, what is the piece of equipment that they're looking for, or looking after rather? And it's this. And I'm now going to try and explain this very carefully, because it's a bit of technology which our people haven't developed yet. They think it's possible, or they think that it's possible to do what these people have done, but at the moment nobody's managed to do it. This, if you look at the red bands here, that is the top of the vessel, and this is the bottom, and it goes across there, and this area here is in fact a tank of water, but it's got a very special water in it. It's got heavy water, with the hydrogen being deuterium, and you've probably guessed now what it is. It is in fact a cold fusion unit. I'll deal with what's going on here first, and then we'll move out away from it. So you've got a tank of water here with heavy water in, and what you're going to do, because it's based on quantum science, not on Newtonian science, you're going to put a magnetic field into it with the right wavelength for tunneling to occur between the deuterium atoms. So one deuterium atom can tunnel into another deuterium atom and fuse and release energy. And this is the bit of equipment that does it. With the aerials, there are 3 aerials in this particular one, projecting the magnetic fields into the tank of water. But in addition to that, it's also got a palladium catalyst in it as well to help the process on. So the basic unit is very simple. You just get your deuterium, water, you work out what wavelength you need for your magnetic field, you put your catalyst into it, and hey presto, the thing goes off and it starts heating up. Now because it's water, it'll start boiling at 100 degrees, and you don't want to do that. So this will be operating almost certainly at under 100 degrees, but possibly close to it. So the next question is, how do you get the heat out? Now these guys, in fact, had access to silver as well as copper. Today we would probably use copper around it so that the heat is conducted through the copper very readily, but silver is even better. So it is encased in silver, and it's only encased on the sides, not on the top or the bottom, but it's only on the sides. So there's a silver case around it and another one on the outside. So these canes going around there, canes here, are telling us where the outer layer of the heat exchanger is. And the material inside is in fact carbon dioxide. So this picks up, the carbon dioxide picks up the heat from the cold fusion system, and it's then conducted away. This there's a pipe running across here, and where this, you can see it marked out on the ground, and then it goes up to the next story above, where you've got the turbines and the generators. So they're in the story above this. So there we've got the basic elements of the cold fusion system. Now everybody who knows anything about cold fusion will know that there's an awful lot of neutrons flying around. And if a neutron meets up with a nitrogen atom, you're liable to get carbon-14. So when we look for these things, we look for the carbon-14 halo around the system. So this was found quite simply by walking around the fields and with a few pointers to guide us, looking for the carbon-14 halo, and that is what gives these systems away. So all around the soil here, the neutrons, there'll be carbon-14 in the rock and soil around it, so quite a big carbon-14 shadow which we are able to pick up. Now the carbon-14 of course has a different magnetic field to carbon-12 and carbon-13, so we're able to home in on carbon-14 specifically. Now to protect the people who are operating the system, the blue line here is indicating a wall boron nitride, I think it is, here, which absorbs the neutrons. And if the boron absorbs the neutrons, then it produces helium, alpha particle first, which is then helium. So we can pick up a high concentration of helium in the protective barrier around the reactor. And to make doubly certain, so to speak, of protection, they put another one, this is the red one here, between the reactor and where people rest and sleep. So going back to our reactor, we now know that in what we call the silent time, that there were advanced cultures and civilizations present that were actually able to produce this sort of equipment. Now, the bilocation team, of course, is not just looking at cold fusion reactors, they're looking at other things as well. So this is only one bit of the equipment that is possible to identify as being in use during the silent time. What we're not too certain of yet is the actual date of the system, but we're pretty certain that it predates the 10,000 year period, and in fact could be 5 or 10,000 years earlier on, when the people were using this sort of equipment. But we don't know, maybe 20,000 years earlier. But we're working on it, and sooner or later we'll be able to work out when this sort of equipment was on planet Earth being used here. So that's another adventure, archaeological. We're down in the ground, and many thanks for watching and listening to our latest adventure.